Good afternoon, and welcome back to Jeff and the Rabbi. Well, the phone was ringing there. Okay, let's try that again. Welcome back to Jeff and the Rabbi. Now, if you are ever on a job interview, that's what this is about today. If you're ever on a job interview and the interviewer asks you to describe your biggest weakness, which they do a lot of times, here are a few answers not to give. Number one, do not give these answers. I really just don't get along with fellow employees, as the attached assault charges should indicate. Don't do that one. Number two, I would say that it was probably a big mistake hooking up with my last boss's teenage daughter at the Christmas party. Not a good thing to bring up to the new boss as a weakness. Three, some people say my biggest weakness is my rancid breath, but I probably have to go with my uncontrollable flatulence. Not a good thing to bring up. And number four, this is probably the biggest one there not to bring up.
It's the last one.
This is the last one, by the way, the last one. Number four, I have never been told that I have a weakness, and now you have triggered me into demanding an extended emotionally induced vacation, you racist. Don't bring that up in a job interview. Now, see, the point of an interview is that you are trying to sell yourself. You want the questioner to believe in you. You want him to see only you. He wants to see you only in a positive light if you want the job. I would think this same logic would apply to almost everything in our lives. If I was putting together a sales email about a product, I would probably only discuss the positive aspects. I would not want to show my product or myself lacking in discipline or results. Then why, Rabbi, does God show some of these apparently negative characteristics about himself, Moses, and the chosen people in this week's parsha about the golden calf? Now, the rabbi says that this actually is the proof of the Torah. If someone was just writing a story to sell a religion to a group of people, they would definitely not have included this parsha in their final cut of the Torah there, I would think. First, Moses gets angry and smashes the tablets that were composed by the finger of God. Then the Lord, apparently through his anger, decides to wipe out the Jewish people, only then to be dissuaded by Moses, a mere mortal. It doesn't seem to be the highest moment for our Creator or his disciples. But like in every other section of the Torah, we find that Hashem is teaching us something a lot deeper than what appears on the surface. God is very happy that Moses stood up to him in defense of the Jewish people. With this, the Lord teaches Moses that yes, the Torah is filled with rules and consequences, but God is forgiving and always will be there for Israel. What appears to be emotion and anger and weakness by God is really just him teaching a lesson of compassion to Moses and Israel. So God is able to show what falsely appears to be his weakness to get Moses to understand a very important concept, thus proving the validity of the Torah to the rabbi. But with that said, I still would suggest not honestly mentioning your malodorous gastric issues to future employers before they sign the contract. Just saying. That's all I got.
Thankfully,
that's all I got. I stopped right there.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me ask you the following series of questions.
I'm ready.
Okay. What do we know that Muhammad, where does it say in the Quran that Muhammad did wrong?
I don't think it says anything.
What was Jesus's failure?
You know, it pretty much doesn't bring up one.
Okay. What was Confucius's mistake?
Think about buying fortune cookies. None.
Right. And of course, both of us being like big Confucian experts
here.
I
am a Confucian expert.
Right. Okay, Confucian expert.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So I'm an expert in Confucian. But the bottom line is, in all these things, when we read the book about the hero,
right,
the star, the source, the God, the divine, the connection to the divine, whichever one you want,
right.
Son of God, prophet of God, descendant of God, the emperor of Japan, just
right.
Came down from a chrysanthemum blossom or something,
true.
I don't know.
True, yeah.
Anyway, you never hear about anything that they did wrong.
No, they censor that out if it happens.
Right. I mean, they just never bother to put it in because, after all, why would you put it in?
You're talking about a God or
right.
a son. You're right, you can't do it.
You don't put it in. Flip open the Torah. And we can identify mistakes of all of our forefathers,
Definitely,
you know,
yeah, yes.
the story is all like laden,
Flawed
with flaws and struggles.
Parenthood and everything
The
is wrong.
brothers sold Joseph, and
Right.
on and on and on.
That's a
right?
good point, yeah.
Right down to Moses himself. We know Moses got angry. Gonna come up later on the Torah. He hits the rock.
Right.
Okay, Moses makes his mistakes. You know, it sounds as though God even sets himself up for a mistake, although it's a little questionable. But God seems to say, like, you know, I regret what I have done,
Right.
and I'm going to wipe them out, and I'm going to start with a new nation. But then Moshe talks him out of it. But that one, if you read it closely, it looks like he's almost asking Moshe to talk him out of it. But
Right. Okay.
bottom line is, what is the benefit of all of this? What do we get from all this?
Well, I think you probably hit on it, what you mentioned to me last night. Is maybe one, it's more believable, and the story itself is more believable. These people, not God, but our forefathers were actually human, and it's a little bit more believable. That's one, I would assume.
So we, first of all, just from a historical perspective, if you're going to use any text as a source text, the one that is willing to mention flaws sounds like the more real text than the other ones.
I would think
Because
so.
the other ones are clearly written to be a paean to the great one, whoever the great one is. And this text is willing to mention failures. So that's a very important thing, which seems to indicate that the text itself is really a valid text. Because if it was just written by a bunch of people who are trying to promote some figure, maybe even some figure that they concocted, in other words,
Right.
a group of guys sit down later and let's create Moses. We'll write up a Moses story and all that. And we'll even write up a story where God gave the Torah to the Jewish people and they were all mightily impressed. And we'll even write in the sentence, and Moses says to the people, don't be afraid. This is right immediately upon the giving of the Torah. Don't be afraid. The reason God did this was so that you should fear him and you'll never ever sin again. Turn the page, they're sinning.
Bam.
Right there.
Right.
Not even 5 chapters later,
Right.
and you have to go, hey, wait, I thought he said, no, like
you
the
don't
right
have to go
next
back
page.
forward and see that we weren't supposed to do that.
40
Right.
days later, it's the next episode, they're already sinning. What's going on? So that tells you that this book is trying to tell you a real story. Nobody would have written that in if it hadn't happened. And the group of guys was concocting this whole story centuries later. They want to write up this story and they want to promote it as being the story.
Right.
Who would have ever thought of writing that in? It wouldn't have come up to anyone like, hey, let's write in a story, in order to make this really believable, let's write in a story where there was this humongous failure. It is implausible.
Right.
The failure itself is so implausible, they wouldn't have even thought to write it in. The only way they could have possibly ever written that story in is if it really happened.
And that makes sense.
So therefore, before we talk about anything about meaning, this is just a indication that the story as recorded in the book is for real. Because who else would have put that in there?
Right. It'd be like going on an interview and mentioning all these bad things.
That's
You're not going to get the job.
There you do it. Right. Now, let's go to the
I just wanted
second
to put
half.
a plug for my pitch there. That's
Right.
because of my promo. Okay.
Let's go through the second half of the story. Now let's see why. Right? Why are we putting all those things in there? Is it just to verify the book? No, there's something deeper. What is the story of the Torah? The story of the Torah is a story of growth, struggle, failure, struggle, growth, right?
That sounds
As a
familiar to me.
matter of
That's my
fact,
life. Never mind.
it's a story of trying to re-achieve something. You start off, they're in Garden of Eden. It's the
Yeah.
first episode. The whole story starts off, they're in this perfected place. They lose it. It's the first story, first failure, right? We start off with that first failure, which is very important and significant to us. And the rest of the story is about recovering from that failure. And even when they recover from that failure, according to our sages, when God gave them the Torah, they had recovered from the failure of the Garden of Eden. They were right back. The people at the base of Mount Sinai were just like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Just like they were all back there. Guess what? Golden calf?
Oops.
Golden calf is like, eating from the fruit, round 2.
Wow.
Adam and Eve, perfect, eating from the fruit.
So supposedly, just to clarify, you're saying that at this point we were ready to go back in. Everything was going to be great. There wasn't going to be struggling, or everything was going to be awesome. We were there. We got a redemption.
Living in this super perfected with God. God's talking to you. I mean, it's like living in the Garden of Eden. You're not eating. You're not plowing and planting. You're eating food that falls from heaven. It's like the Garden of Eden.
Wow.
Right? Perfect. Just like the Garden of Eden. The water spews forth from a rock. And the food grows on trees, and you just pluck it and eat it, and you just hang out with God all the time, and everyone is perfect. Of course, just like in the Garden of Eden, they ate from the tree, messed it all up. So too at Mount Sinai, worshiped the golden calf, messed it all up. What are we doing now? Recovering, trying to claw our way back. Now, why do we have to have the perfection and then the failure? Why don't we just have it start off where we are, and we're working our way towards some goal? Because it's really hard to work towards an undefined goal or a promise. But to get back to somewhere that you were,
that makes sense.
Right. It's kind of like the land of Israel.
That's true.
We never went to the land of Israel. I mean, Abraham did. But we have gone back to Israel. Came out of Egypt.
Right.
They went back to Israel. That's back to where they came from. And we live in here are trying to go back to where we came from. Getting back to something is a whole different ballgame than to get to some undefined, ill-defined place that no one really knows exactly what it is. When you're going back to something, you know what it is, you've been there, you can have it, so you're trying to get
going back to the garden. Joan Baez. That's right, originally.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think Crosby, Stills and Nash, sang that afterwards, but she wrote it.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Get back to the garden.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
I'm helping.
Let's pull that up on YouTube. Anyway,
yes.
So we're trying to get back to where we're going. That's A.
Right.
And that's a very important story. But the story of failure and struggle and imperfection, and as a matter of fact, the story of the imperfections of the great ones in the Torah, including Moses, are very, very instructive. The Torah doesn't put in too many stories about low-level failures, because low-level failures are often due to human frailties. And I don't need to know too much more about human frailty. I know all about human frailty. Right? We're all pretty familiar with that.
Yep.
But to know that even great people can make mistakes, can make misjudgments, can be focused on the wrong thing at times, right? Those are very, very important and instructive messages for us and for each and every one of us. That's what the Torah is all about. The Torah is about struggle and growth. And don't be afraid if you have shortcomings. The job of life is to get to somewhere. It was Moses' job. Matter of fact, what's the greatest thing it says about Moses?
It's humble.
Moses was the humblest man who ever lived. How do you get humble? You recognize your
Right.
shortcomings.
That's the only way you can get humble. True.
Yeah, they never said Jesus was humble. He was God. Like, how can he be humble?
Right.
They don't say Muhammad was humble. Like, what do you mean humble? He's like the prophet, right? And on and on and on. Moses was humble. Moses was most proud of the fact that God called him his trusted servant. I'm here to serve. There's a certain humility. You are great. I'm here to serve you. And Moses, with his mistakes and his successes and his failures, we don't talk about how smart Moses was. We don't talk about how wondrous he was. He did some deeds. We talk about him struggling mostly with us to get along with the people, and
Right.
that's a big deal. That's a big theme. But we don't talk about, we don't amaze ourselves about all the wonderful things he did and all his acts of loving kindness, because that's not really what it's about. Because the main thing that Moses is all about, he was a servant of God. And whatever God wanted, that's what he tried to do. And that's what we're supposed to try to do. So for that, you have to be very humble. It makes you very humble. And you also realize you're not perfect. You're struggling all the time. You're trying to make progress. That's what our story is all about. And therefore, first of all, the text, because it has failure, is more believable.
Right.
But even more importantly, not only is it believable, but it's more instructive and helpful to us as we try to navigate our way through life.
So what did we learn from Moses' failure and from God's apparent mistake at the golden calf?
Right. So at the golden calf, we learn a lot from, by the way, how about Aaron's failure? Let's start off.
See, that's
already
always
jumped
been
in.
my biggest question.
Yeah,
is
you
Aaron's
jumped
failure.
in the story already,
Right.
like,
Right.
into it. Aaron, it starts with Aaron, right? So it
That
starts
seems like
with
a
Aaron.
pretty big one there.
Yes. And actually, but no, I do want to say it does start with Moses. But the story of Moses' failure is not readily apparent in the text, but it is indicated in the text. Here's the deal. It says in the text, God says to Moses, when God sees they've built the golden calf, Moses is up on the mountain, he doesn't know about any of this.
Right.
God says, go down, because your nation that you brought out of Egypt has degenerated. So, your nation that you brought out of Egypt. I thought just a few chapters earlier, I heard God was on Mount Sinai and said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt.
Ooh.
Now it's like your nation. So there is an important midrash, and the midrash says that there was a group of people, actually not just a group, but millions of people. When they left Egypt, millions of people left with them. Who were they? All the other slaves in Egypt. I mean, there were millions of slaves in Egypt, not just Jews.
Right.
And when the gates flew open, anyone that had half a brain left.
Right.
If you're a slave, you're not sticking around. So they left.
Right.
Many of these people said, looking at the Jews, you guys are just amazing, and God's amazing. We want to join you. Moses, without consulting with God, said, "What? You want to be Jews? Great!" And he took them all in, and he converted them, and they became Jews.
I didn't know that.
God
I mean,
said-
I knew they came with him. I didn't know that story. Yeah.
God says, "You never consulted with me. You didn't ask me." Now God says, "Your nation that you took out of Egypt, they're the ones that got the cold feet. They're the ones primarily that demanded the golden calf. Mostly. There were some Jews that went along with it, but they're mostly the ones that demanded the golden calf." That was Moses' mistake.
So these mixed multiples of people that came out there, like they started all this. They were the ones
Yeah.
who maybe corrupted the rest.
Yeah,
of the
and
people.
the reason is they were the ones that were the most fragile. Because as soon as there's no Moses around, they really needed some,
They needed a leader.
some type of expression, some physical manifestation to focus on, because
Wow.
that's where they were coming from. So they put the pressure on. Then again, of course, then comes Aaron. They leaned on Aaron. And Aaron didn't stand up to them. Aaron didn't grab the situation, didn't get it under control. He basically tried to deal with them, and they ran all over him. They stepped on his face. So Aaron also failed. Moses says to him, "Aaron, how could you have done this?" And Aaron said, I saw they were out of control, and I said, I thought they're going to kill me, right? And then they'll be worse off if they kill me. They're still going to build a golden calf, and then they will have killed me too, and it's going to be even worse for everybody around.
Wow.
So a lot of failures here in this story. Moses' failure, Aaron's failure. God even says, "I made a mistake." And Moses talks him out of it. But God says, "Leave me alone, and I'm going to wipe him out." That's sort of like saying, "Don't leave me alone, and I won't wipe him out."
Right.
But the bottom line is, we don't mind. People make mistakes. That's what it's all about. It's all about recovering, rebuilding, repairing. That's what the Torah is all about, and
Wow.
re-achieving what we originally had.
So that's pretty much, I guess, like our lives. We screw up every day, but God still allows us tomorrow to start all over again.
That's right.
Recover.
Repair relationships. People mess up with their relationships all the time. You can repair relationships. You can repair relationships between people. You can repair your relationship with God. That's really the big one. Because most people feel like, I messed up so bad.
I've
I'm
heard
out
it.
of this.
I've heard that from people.
And then they'd have
What's that gonna
to,
do?
who am I? I'm just a heathen, something like that. Or it's too hard for me to go back at this point. I'm just too far out
I've
of
heard
it.
that many times.
Yeah. So all those things, no. The whole story of the Torah is about repair, recovery, achieving things that you had
Right.
once before, you can achieve them again.
Wow. That's a pretty good story.
Right.
And it's pretty relevant, I would say, because that's pretty much every day for everybody that probably is listening, except you people that don't make mistakes. But for the rest of us, I've made one or two maybe. It's a relevant story.
And it for sure makes the book the most believable of all of them.
It sure does, because again, if you think about it, there are not too many mistakes in any of these other books, by the heroes at least. There's mistakes for the other people, but not by the stars.
Everyone else is, forgive them for they have sinned.
Right.
It's like they have sinned. He doesn't do anything.
The star doesn't do too bad.
The star is always the star. He's the superhero.
Right.
The star is the superhero. Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Good. I like it. Now it makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah. And by the way, since I mentioned superheroes,
right.
I don't want to bring out a little angle. And there have been many Jewish superhero writers. Like all the superheroes were designed by Jewish writers and all that.
That is true.
It's very interesting that the superheroes always have like these frailties.
Every one of them.
They always have
They have their kryptonite.
That's right.
Everyone
Everyone's
has
got their kryptonite. And as time went on, they developed more like social frailties. Like Clark Kent, he really likes
Lois Lane.
Lois Lane. Yeah, there you go. Sorry,
Right.
So they always have their issue, their soft spot, their weakness, and all that. I believe that is because all these creators came from a Jewish background, and they're used to their superheroes, their Moseses, having failures.
Well, I think you're right. If you also look at Hollywood, there's not a single movie where the best boxer is the star. He wins every fight, and that's the movie. No, it's the guy that over here. He screws up. He messes up with his wife, and he then comes and wins. There's always the underdog story. The guy that screws up. The guy that's got a failure, and it's like the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
Everything is about the Brady Bunch.
All things go back to the Brady Bunch.
That's what Schwartz got, didn't he? Right? That everything. Gilligan's Island. It's all the Jews, man. That's where we get these stories from.
So that's I think that comes from a Jewish
Right.
approach, and of course that's why they were so popular, is because people can really relate to that. Superheroes that are just plain out and out super, they're not so much fun because they're just so super. I can't really relate to it. But if the superhero has flaws, hey, that's me, because I'm really a pretty super guy, except I have my flaws.
Now I get it. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a comic book. Good stuff.
Okay.
All right. Super show
Yeah.
today, and then we'll be back next week with another super episode of Chef and the Rabbi.
Yeah.